Henry David. He had big hands and feet, and he had an adorable little nose, and he introduced me to a deeper love than I have ever known was possible.
Welcome to Still a Part of Us, a podcast where moms and dads share the story of their child who was stillborn or who died in infancy. I'm Winter Red, and on this episode, Erin is telling the story of her son Henry, who was stillborn at 38 weeks due to a fetal-maternal hemorrhage. As a word of caution to our listeners, this story contains emotional triggers of stillbirth and infant loss. Please keep yourself emotionally and mentally healthy and seek help if needed. Also be aware that these birth stories may differ from his or her partners, as these accounts are told from their own perspective through the lens of trauma, heartache, and the passage of time. Please respect our moms and dads who are brave and gracious to share their children with us. Erin, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today. We are so grateful that you are willing to share your story about Henry today with us. So thank you and welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Oh yeah, for sure. So Erin, tell me a little bit about yourself and about your family. Who's in your family currently, and where you guys are from, so we kind of have an idea of where you're coming from.
Sure, yeah. So I'm married to my husband, Paul. We've been married for about 7 years, and he is just the best man in the whole world. I'm really happy to be married to him.
That's great.
And so, yeah, we live in Maine, just kind of near the coast. We both grew up here in Maine, and we don't have any living children. We lost our first pregnancy. We named him Abel, and so Henry was our second pregnancy.
Oh, wow. So you had 2 losses then.
Yeah, Abel was a first trimester loss. That was at 10 weeks. And so we didn't officially find out he was a boy, but from the day we conceived, I felt super strongly that he was, and it just felt really good for me to just give him a name.
That's great. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, so those are our boys.
Yeah. And what do you guys do on a day-to-day basis? Any hobbies that you guys like to engage in that are kind of fun?
Yeah. Well, I think my hobbies have disappeared in the past year since Henry died. But before that, so I'm actually a labor and delivery nurse. I work on a maternity unit. And my husband also works in the hospital. He's an MRI technician. So we're both interested in science and human body and stuff like that. And for fun, we love to read, and we love to be outside in nature. I love the ocean. We're both musical. I play guitar and he plays the piano. And we like being with our friends and going out to eat.
That sounds great. You guys sound like 2 peas in a pod.
Yeah, we go well together. I'm grateful.
That is wonderful. That's great. And I actually did not realize you were an L&D nurse.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to get into that at some point in time.
Yep. That's a big part of the story.
I'm sure it is. So, and you guys were living in Maine at the time of Henry's birth, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we still live in the same apartment that we were in when he was born.
Okay, wonderful. And as a little bit of point of reference for everybody, can you tell us how long ago his birth happened?
Yeah, so Henry was born July 31st, 2019. And today that we're recording is July 30th, 2020. So tomorrow will be 1 year ago.
Yeah, I'm actually quite impressed that you are willing and feeling okay to record today. So thank you. I'm just going to say that right now. So thank you.
Well, I'm actually really happy that you offered me this day because it feels like a great way to honor him.
Good. So tell me about how this pregnancy went. Obviously, Abel came before. You guys had a miscarriage at 10 weeks.
Yeah.
And so did you have any difficulty getting pregnant with Henry? Was that planned? Was that something
Yeah,
that you guys were
so
hoping to happen?
both of our pregnancies were planned, and thankfully very easy. I got pregnant the first month with both of them, which I was grateful for. So of course, after losing Abel with Henry's pregnancy, there was a lot of anxiety and panic in the beginning, and just certain that he was going to die. So we did have an early ultrasound at 7 weeks and saw his little beating heart and couldn't believe it. It was really wonderful. And at our appointment with the midwife at 11 weeks, we got to hear the heartbeat and we both just sobbed.
Oh.
It was a really special moment. I was very sick. Ugh.
Were you?
Ugh, just awful.
Really?
So sick.
Oh.
Like they call it morning sickness, but it was just all day sickness for me.
Yeah.
Just until it was all the way gone at 22 weeks.
Whoa. So for quite a long time, not just first trimester, you were well into the second.
Yes. I kept waiting. Everybody kept saying, 12 weeks, it'll ease up. 14 weeks. Oh, definitely 16 weeks, you'll feel better. And I was like, what the heck is going on?
I know, you're like, this is not fair.
This is torture. But basically, after that went away, I started to feel fine, and the pregnancy was pretty normal and uneventful. Just trying to keep my anxiety in check.
Yeah.
Right about 6 months, we had 2 fetal deaths on the unit that I work on. One was at 31 weeks and one was a full-term stillbirth. And that really rattled me. That was tough to try to just like keep my mindset positive and like, this is really rare. It doesn't happen to everyone, but I still sort of always had a sinking feeling that we were still going to lose this baby. So,
really?
But then towards the end, I was really excited, and there were lots of times that I let myself believe we were going to bring this baby home.
Yeah.
And we didn't know the gender, and so that was really exciting. And there was, I think, 8 of us at work that were pregnant.
At the same time. At the same time.
Yeah, my poor manager. Oh my goodness. She's like planning all these maternity leaves.
I was about to say, what? I mean, that's an HR nightmare. It feels like
it really is.
Like,
people were like, there's something in the water. But
that's kind of fun too. Cool. And fun.
It was really cool. And I had 4 close friends outside of work that we were all, so we had like this really tight mama club that I was just super excited to be part of.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's fun. That's super fun. And so it is interesting to me because as somebody that has not really had stillbirth on my radar until we lost our son, you obviously trained to be aware of this. And then also having kind of a couple of instances where some families lost their babies also. So that was still on your mind, kind of didn't help with anxiety, I'm sure.
No, it didn't. And I remember I had never actually been the nurse to take care of a person during a stillbirth. I had just supported other nurses through that. And so this one birth that happened, the doctor that was on, she actually called us all into the room and said, I think it's really important for you all to see, what this baby looks like at this gestational age and after a stillbirth. And as a nurse, it's like you try to take every educational experience you can get, but also as a pregnant mom, I was like, this is not good for me.
Yeah, I would be so terrified. I'd be like, oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So fear was a part of the pregnancy for sure.
Yeah. So you're kind of getting along in the weeks and starting to get excited finally.
Yep.
Can you tell us what happened after
that?
that?
So it all kind of changed around 36 weeks. For a couple of visits consistently, I had been measuring a little bit small. I'm a tall person. I'm 5'9", and I have a very long torso. So I wasn't really worried about it. I was just kind of like, oh, well, there's plenty of room in there, so I'm not measuring very big, whatever.
Yeah.
But by the 3rd week in a row, I was 3 centimeters smaller than I should have been. So they're like, well, let's just get an ultrasound just to make sure. So I got an ultrasound and they said that my fluid level was low. So it's supposed to be above 5 or 6, and they said mine was at 4.
Okay.
And they also said that his measurements were strange. They were concerned about something called asymmetric IUGR. which is like growth restriction. Like he's too small, but it's not in a proportional way, which can be really concerning for the health of his organs and stuff like that. So that was pretty terrifying. I was like, what? My baby has IUGR and my fluid is at 4. Like, what?
Wait, you're like, wait a second. This can't be happening.
Wait a second.
Now, Erin,
I feel totally healthy and fine.
Yeah.
You know?
And then when, like at the 20-week, did you have a 20-week like anatomy scan?
We did. Yeah. And everything was totally fine.
Okay. Yep. So everything up until then was looking great then.
Yeah. Yep. No concerns whatsoever.
Okay.
And I was very, as an L&D nurse, I see a lot of inductions and C-sections, which of course sometimes can be necessary and sometimes are not, in my opinion, you know, I mean, in the medical field, the way things work.
Right.
So I was pretty much dead set on, I will not be induced no matter what.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I really, with all my heart, wanted to just go into labor on my own. And I wasn't concerned about my blood pressure or whatever. So then this thing comes up, your fluid is low and the baby could have some issues. And I was like, oh my word. So we decided to do, but the woman who took the pictures, the ultrasound tech, she did say, the baby's in kind of a weird position. It's hard for me to get the measurements, so I can't be 100% sure that they're accurate.
Okay.
So we said, okay. So we decided to stay overnight and do some IV hydration. It was July and it was hot and I had a sunburn. And so they're like, you know, it could be that your body is just using up all the extra fluid and you just need some serious rehydration.
Okay.
So we stayed overnight and we heard his beautiful, strong heartbeat on the monitor for 24 hours. And that was really special. I loved it. And yeah, he was fine. Like there was no dips in the heartbeat the whole time.
Great.
And so I got the hydration and I said, you know, I want to do the rescan in Portland at MFM, just because if we're using this information to decide if I'm going to be induced or not, I would really like it to be at a bigger hospital with more high-tech ultrasound.
Right. And the MFM is the maternal fetal medicine, I'm assuming. Okay, great.
Yeah, exactly. So Portland is where all the high-risk patients go, and they do tons of stuff that we don't do in our community hospital. So we went to MFM the next day, and we were totally expecting to have them say, yep, your fluid's still low. We're going to do an induction tonight at 36 weeks. That was what we were trying to prepare ourselves for mentally. And they said, your fluid is 11 and the baby's measurements are fine.
Oh.
And we're like, what?
Really?
Yeah. So that was a shock. So, yeah. So anyways, they said, you can go home. Like we'll rescan you in a week and make sure that everything's okay. And we're like, okay. And so we went home, and 37 weeks, we went back again, expecting we're going to be induced today. And they said, your fluid dropped a little, but it's still at 10. Baby looks fine. We'll check you again in a week. 38 weeks, same thing. Fluid dropped a little. It's at 9. Baby's measuring fine. They said he's like in the 20th percentile, so a little bit small, but no signs of IUGR.
Okay.
And so they said,
sure that was a relief.
Yeah. They're like, you're at 38 weeks. You've had 3 consistent good scans. You don't have to be checked anymore. Just wait for labor to start. And I was like, holy moly, we made it. Like,
yeah.
Like it's 38 weeks. He could come out anytime and be fine. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, at that point, the idea of him dying inside me was not present in my mind at that point. I was just so wanting to get to the point where if he was induced, he would be okay on the outside.
Right, right.
And so we had reached that point, and I was like, oh my goodness, really excited. And so then, let's see, that was Thursday. And then Sunday, the 28th, he made these huge movements inside me that I have never felt before. I was like, what are you doing? Like, what is happening in there? And he had been head down, and I was just like, he must have just totally flipped upside down. Oh. He must be breached. Like, what just happened in my belly? So I called up my midwife, and before we went to church, I just scooted over to the hospital to have an ultrasound. And she said, no, he's still head down. He's really, really low in your pelvis, and the heart rate is great, and you could go into labor any day. And I'm like, awesome. So that was reassuring. And then the next morning, Monday, was the 29th, and my husband went to work. And I woke up and I felt really weird. I had a really bad headache and I felt nauseous and just like something is off in my body. This is weird. And I was contracting. I was contracting every 10 minutes, like not super uncomfortable, but I was just aware of the tightening.
Okay.
And so I was like, some women feel sick when they're going into labor. Or that could just be what's happening. My body's getting ready to go into labor. And so I just went about my day and I did what I tell all women to do when they're in early labor, which is to just try to ignore it. Just go about your day. Early labor can last a long time. So just put it right out of your mind. So that's what I did. And cooked some food, brought my husband lunch, rented myself a movie. I think I took a nap. It was a pretty chill day.
Yeah.
My husband got home and I kept contracting all day. My husband got home from work. We had dinner and it was 9:30. We laid down in bed and I laid in bed and I said out loud, I don't think I felt the baby move today. And in the instant that those words came out of my mouth, I knew that he had died. I just had this, it wasn't like a panic or an anxiety. It was just like the knowledge came into my head. Oh, the baby died.
Really?
Yeah, it was very strange. And I didn't say that out loud to my husband. I just laid there and I was like, okay. And so I had a Doppler at my house.
Yeah.
And so I checked for his heartbeat, which I could always find immediately. And I couldn't find it. And so my husband kind of sat up at that point, and was paying a little more attention. And he's like, well, could the baby be in a position that you can't find the heartbeat? And I said, yeah. But in my head, I said, no, no, I'm a trained L&D nurse. I've been doing this for years. I should be able to find the heartbeat.
Yeah.
And so he stood up and he said, well, what is it that you tell women to do when they feel like they haven't felt the baby move? Isn't there something you're supposed to do? He had taken my prenatal classes that I teach.
Good.
He's like, I remember you saying something. I'm like, yes, I tell them to get up and go pee and drink a glass of cold water or some juice and lay down on their left side and pay attention to any little movement that they feel. And if they don't feel anything within an hour, to go to the hospital. He's like, okay, great, let's do that. So I did. I got through some of it. I went up, went pee, got water, laid on my side, and I laid there for maybe 30 seconds and was like, no, I'm not laying here. Something's wrong. We need to go. Okay. So we decided to drive to the hospital, and I just remember the whole drive there just thinking, this cannot be happening. This cannot be happening. Like, please, little baby, you've got to be okay, and praying to God for a miracle, but just knowing the baby was dead. And I was like, this can't be happening. And I remember wondering who was working that night and just thinking about all the women that we triage for decreased fetal movement. That's what we call it, decreased fetal movement. Mm-hmm. And they're always very quick and easy triages. It's like most of the time the women show up and they're like, oh, I felt the baby move on my way over here or whatever. You put the monitor on, you instantly hear the heartbeat, right. And it's just fast and easy. Yep, baby's okay. And I just knew that was not going to be the way my triage went. And I felt really bad for whoever was the nurse working. I mean, all these nurses were my friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, oh my goodness. And so we walked in and my friend Jess was there. She was the nurse who took me into the triage room. And I remember I was laying on the stretcher and I couldn't look at anyone. I had my left hand over my eyes and my right hand was holding Paul, and I couldn't look at anybody. I'm like, this isn't happening. And she put the monitor on me and she couldn't find a heartbeat. And so she tried for a few minutes and she said, I'm going to go get Anita and let her try. And I said, okay. And Anita came in and she tried, and she was just, they weren't finding it. And I knew what was happening, and I hadn't looked at Paul, so I don't know what was going on with him in that moment. But I eventually just said to Anita, Anita, is there a doctor on the unit right now? And she said, no, there isn't. And I was like, okay, well, I think it's time for us to call one. And she said, yeah, I think so too. So, so they left, and I don't think I was crying at that point. I think I was just like in shock, and I still had my hand over my eyes, and they called the midwife in, my friend Emily, and, she came in. She was at home, so she came in about a half an hour later, and I hadn't moved. I was still just there with my hand over my eyes. I was just frozen. And she brought in the ultrasound, the bedside ultrasound, and she said, Erin, do you want to look? Do you want to see what's going on? And I said, no, just tell me what you see. And it's burned into my brain, the sound of her voice. And she said, the heart's not beating. I was like, yep, okay. And I just couldn't believe it. I'm sitting on this unit where I have helped hundreds of women give birth to their babies, and this was my turn, and we were right at the end, and then his heart's not beating. Like, what? It was a really awful moment. And so she said, I'm going to give you a minute. And at that point, I finally got up and looked at Paul and hugged him, and we both cried. And just, yeah, just the shock of it is really overwhelming.
It is. It's so awful. It's so awful.
It's so awful.
I can't imagine you being there with your friends and just knowing that they're going to have to, they delivered the bad news, like.
Yeah, I felt so bad. In that moment, I think I was so in shock about what was happening to us that I was feeling compassion for them more so. Like, that was easier to grab onto.
Yeah. You're like, this can't be happening to me. No.
No, my poor friend is having to tell someone their baby's dead. Like, what is this? Oh, it's me. It's my baby.
Yeah.
So anyways, Emily came back in, and, we talked about the plan for induction, and so we went home to grab some stuff. I had actually packed all of our stuff that day because I was feeling like labor was coming, and I had all sorts of stuff. I just had this total vision of how I wanted my labor to go. And I had a big quilt that a bunch of my friends had signed and written little messages to me on, like, you can do this, your body was made to do this. And I had poster boards that I had made with pictures of my friends that had babies with no pain medicine. And I had all these messages written to myself. I had a labor playlist, and I had a essential oil diffuser. I was just
you were so prepared.
I was going to create this awesome place to just have a super peaceful, natural birth. And so then we go home, and it's just so surreal. Like, do I bring this stuff? Like, what I mean, the whole thing is just ruined at this point, but I wanted to save something of what I had envisioned, so we pack everything, we drive back to the hospital, and at that point it was maybe 1 a.m, and we had to go in through the emergency room entrance. I remember, because the main door was locked, and the woman was like, oh, you're going to L&D. Okay, well, you just hang on a second, I got to get someone to bring a wheelchair. And I was like, I'm not in labor, I can walk, I work on this unit, I don't need a wheelchair. And she's like, well, it's protocol, we don't want any babies getting hurt around here. And I just wanted to punch her in the face.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't need a freaking wheelchair. Okay, just open the door.
Yeah. Yep.
That was awful. But they insisted. They brought a wheelchair, and I said, I'm not sitting in that. And she said, okay, well, I'm just going to walk beside you up to the unit. And I was like, you do whatever you need to do. That's fine. I was so angry. But yeah. So anyways, they had to do another ultrasound to confirm, with an actual ultrasound tech before we started the induction. And so they had to call somebody in, and they said the person that was coming in, and she was actually someone that goes to the same church that we do. And I was like, nope, you're not calling her in. nope, I'm not having the first person from the outside world find out that our baby's dead be this person. And they're like, we're so sorry. Like, there's nobody else
Oh,
for us to call. We have to call her. And I was like, oh. So she came in middle of the night and she's like, oh, Erin. And I was like, can we just pretend that we don't know each other right now, please? And she was like, yeah, yeah. So that was tough.
yeah.
Yeah. So then started the induction process. So that was the 30th. It was about 2 a.m. and we did a few rounds of cytotech, which is a medicine that they give you to try to get things going. And it did make me contract a little bit. Is it okay for me to be talking about the delivery now?
Yeah, completely. I want to hear this.
Okay.
Oh, actually, Erin,
Okay.
I do have one question for you. Did you, like, obviously it's kind of getting late in the night. Did you call anybody? Did
Yeah.
you let anybody know what was
Oh,
happening?
yeah. So my cousin was supposed to, two of my cousins were supposed to come be with me. They're basically like my sisters.
Mm,
They were planning to come be with me for the birth. And so in that moment, I decided I didn't want them to come.
yeah.
I just wanted to be with Paul. But I texted my Auntie Kim, who I'm very, very close with. She's like a second mom. And I told her, I said, please don't say anything to anybody, but we're going to the hospital to be induced. And when the baby's born, it won't be alive. I'm not sure if I want anybody to come or not, but can you just be on standby in case I need you? And she had actually given me a necklace when we lost Abel that says, I carried you every second of your life and I'll love you every second of mine. And that was like my special necklace. And when we left for the hospital the first time, I put that necklace on and I said, this is going to apply again. I know it. And so that was really heartbreaking. So I
Yeah.
had her necklace on. So I texted her and I also texted, we had hired a birth photographer
Oh, okay.
because I am just like obsessed with labor and birth pictures. I think they're the coolest thing
They're
ever.
so beautiful. Like, oh, yeah, I agree.
So beautiful, so amazing. And I was like, this is my turn. Like I want these awesome pictures
Yeah.
of me and my
Yeah,
baby.
you're like, I want it all. Yeah.
So I want it all. So I had texted her and again explained the situation and said that I would still really like her to come if she was comfortable. And she said, I absolutely will still come, but I want you to know that I've never photographed a stillbirth before. And I do have a friend who is much more experienced in that than I am. And I would love to have her come if you're comfortable with it. I know you've never met her, but I just feel confident that she could take much better pictures than I
Mm,
could, which was really nice of her.
yeah.
And so I was like, sure, that's fine. So I had Paul call that woman and she was like, absolutely. She was like, I live an hour and a half away. As soon as things start getting crazy up in there, just text me and I will come night or day. And I was like, oh my goodness, this woman I've never even met. So those are the only people I called. I texted my aunt and I texted the birth photographer.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so we started the
The cytotech, a couple of rounds of
site
those.
attack.
Hmm.
Yep. So we started that about 2 a.m. And it was like, the ultrasounds were a little more frequent, a little stronger, but not uncomfortable whatsoever. And so eventually it's the morning, it's like 7:30 in the morning, and the new midwife comes on, Maud, who's also a good friend of mine. She says, oh my goodness, Erin, everyone is just out there sobbing. Like it was shift change. My
Yeah.
manager had showed up, the day nurses had showed up, and you've got the patients' names listed on the board in our room as you're making assignments, and they see Erin stillbirth, and she's like, everyone is just sobbing and everyone wants to come in here and hug you, and I'm sure you don't want that, but I just want you to know, like, we're all out there just trying to send you all our strength. And so that was really special.
Yeah.
And there was another nurse there who was the exact same gestation as me, and I just remember saying, like, is she okay? Like, please take care of her, tell her not to think about it, like this isn't going to happen to her. I was really
Yeah.
concerned how that was going to affect her. But so anyways, it basically went the whole day. We did 3 rounds of side attack, nothing really changed. I was like a centimeter dilated, and so I just knew we were getting nowhere.
Yeah.
And so I
Contractions
found myself,
were the contractions getting stronger and such though?
they were getting a little bit stronger, but I wasn't by any means uncomfortable.
Okay.
I was just like, I knew when they were happening, but I wasn't in labor yet.
And Erin, I think I know this. Were you still planning on having a natural birth?
that was my plan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted to save something of my plan,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
my midwife, Maud, I could tell she was trying to say to me, like, there is no point to this, like, save yourself a little bit of pain. And also she said, there's a big mental component to this, Erin, and a lot of women in labor during a stillbirth, their bodies don't want to let go of the baby, so you could labor for a long time and your body might not want to open up. And I was like, I know, Maud, I know, but just let me try to do things my way. so um so eventually I found myself saying those words that I've heard so many women say, like, let's just get on with this. I just want this to be done. Like, start the Pitocin, break my water, let's go.
Yeah.
Like all these things that I had always said I would never do. Oh, goodness. And I think at some point Paul's parents showed up, but I didn't want to see anybody. So he just went outside and chatted with them for a bit and then came back. So we just, went through it. And so I think, I can't remember, sometime in the afternoon, we started the Pitocin, and it just really, I really wasn't uncomfortable. Like, things were not progressing.
Okay.
So Maud said, do you want to break your water? And she's like, it might not do anything, but it might move things along. And I was like, sure, let's go. So that was about 5:45 that we decided that. And she hadn't even taken her hand out of me from doing that. And this contraction came that just like, oh my goodness, okay, we have turned the corner. It's like 0 to 100. I was like, Maud, get your hands out of me. I gotta stand up. I was just like freaking out. I could not believe it shocked me. Just like, bam, the contractions were so strong and right on top of each other. And it was Maud, and my friend Amy was my nurse, and I was just like, get out. I need to get my head ready for this, because I wasn't expecting it to do that.
To be so quick.
So quick. I just, like, it went from nothing to full-blown labor. And I was like, whoa, okay. So I kicked them out, and I was like, Paul, we got to get everything ready. So I wanted to lay my quilt out on the table and put my vision boards up and play our music and turn the diffuser on. All this stuff. And these contractions are coming every 2 minutes. And so I only have like a minute in between to be directing him what to do. And then I'd be like, go put this up. And I'd be like, wait, come back, push on my back. Poor guy.
He's probably running around like.
He's running all around. Oh my goodness. So that was a little bit crazy. But eventually I felt like everything was set up, and I was able to kind of get into my mental space that I was ready for labor. And I just did all the things that I've taught women to do, to use your breath and to give in to the sensation and let it wash over you, and to know that it will come to a peak and it'll go away, and find something to focus on. And I really felt like my brain was in the zone. Like, I can do this. I'm doing okay.
It's amazing.
And it was really intense, but it was something I felt like I'd been planning for so long. And at some point we got in the tub, and I could hear, like, throughout the whole experience, I felt like my nurse brain was also very much on. Like, I was assessing things like a nurse even while I was in labor, which really surprised me, because I didn't expect that to be the case. So I'm in the tub, and at some point I start to realize that what I'm feeling and the noises that I'm making sound like what the woman sounds like right before she's about to push the baby out.
Okay.
We call it transition, and I'm like, Paul's freaking out. He's like, your noises are sounding really different. And I'm like, Amy, can you please tell him this is normal? Oh, I'm just like, trying to help my husband. And I told Maud, I really feel like I need to push. And so I thought, holy moly, I'm going to do it. And she checked me in the tub, and she said, oh, Erin, she's like, I'm so sorry. Like the baby's head is so low, which I think is what's making you feel like you need to push, but you're only 4 centimeters. And I was like, oh, are you kidding me?
Oh.
So in that moment, my self-esteem
Oh.
shattered. And I was like, are you kidding me? I can't do this for hours more.
No. Oh.
Oh, so I was really, really discouraged at that point, and I didn't even really have time to think because the contractions were just so close. And looking back, I really wish we had tried shutting the Pitocin off,
Mm.
and seeing if my body could kind of just keep going on its own, but maybe a little less intense. So that is a big regret that I have. But I wasn't fully present enough to make that decision. But I just remember feeling like my pubic bone was being sawed in half. That's how it felt.
Oh.
Like I had no pain at the top of my belly whatsoever, but at the bottom, it just felt like I was cracking in half, and like I was slipping into this darkness in each contraction, like I was just going to die. And I'm like, I can't. This is not. Nope, I can't do this.
This sounds awful, Erin.
It was awful. I was really upset, and the whole time I'm feeling like this huge failure, like, ugh. So anyways, I eventually waved my white flag and was like, all right, let's bring the pain meds in here. And so we have a protocol for which pain meds you use first.
Mm-hmm,
and so I did nitrous, and that worked for a little while, and I tried Nubane, and that did absolutely nothing. And then I was like, okay, epidural time, call up Katerina. I knew the anesthesiologist
who was gonna, oh my gosh,
crazy. So I remember that when I said that, Paul leaned into me and he said, this is the right decision, like you're making the right decision. And I felt really, I know that, and the people I've told this story to have tried to comfort me about this, but I felt really disappointed in myself in that moment. And I think I was just trying to save something, just save some part of how I had wanted this to go.
Yeah.
It's really just all ruined from the time they say your baby's not alive. So what's the point? But anyways, yeah, so the epidural situation was, and at that point, the photographer showed up, who I had never met. And I'm just like, who is this lady? She's like, I'm Bree. And I'm like, okay, I'm Erin. And I think that's all we said to each other the whole night until the baby was born. But she was great because she made herself very inconspicuous. So that was really awesome. And so we did the epidural, and man, holding still for that while you're having those contractions is like torture. And I remember at one point I yelled at Amy, can we shut the Pitocin off for this part? She was like, yes we can. Yes we can. So they put the epidural in, and I remember hearing the anesthesiologist say what rate to set it at for the medicine, and I kind of thought that's a little bit high. And my body's really, really sensitive to medicine. So I had a split second moment of, I wonder if that's too high for me. But then the contractions went away, and I was just like, nope, that is a glorious setting. Just leave it right at that.
You're like, relief, finally.
Finally. And I had this moment where I was like, why would anyone ever do this without an epidural? It's just like, what was I thinking?
Oh man. So yeah.
Oh my goodness. It was crazy. So I don't even know what happened after that. They lost my IV. They had to put a new one in. They had to poke me 7 times, and they kept apologizing. And I was like, I do not care. You can poke me 100 times. It is nothing compared to what was just happening to me.
Yeah.
So anyways, that was it. They put it in. I felt great. They rolled me over onto my left side, said they would come and check me in half an hour, try to sleep. Paul and I both just instantly fell asleep. And I woke up maybe 15 minutes later, and I just had this really weird feeling. Obviously I couldn't move my legs, which I knew was part of it, but I couldn't feel my chest Like I couldn't lift my arms and my tongue and chin felt really numb.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
not
that's,
not not good.
no, not at all.
And I'm like, what is happening? And I was in such a like haze, and I'm like, I think it's too high. I think this isn't good. And all the lights are off, and I try to call for Paul, and he's just like totally asleep.
Yeah.
And I can't roll over and hit my call bell. And
Yeah.
so I'm like kind of starting to freak out a little bit. And then I realized, oh yeah, well, there's a call bell right in the bed, and my hand was right next to that, thankfully. So I pushed that, and Amy came in, and I was like, Amy, something's wrong. I can't feel my chest. I'm having a hard time breathing. I'm really scared. And the rest of it is kind of blurry after that. It's kind of combined with things that Paul told me. I remember I was shaking really bad. I couldn't stop shaking, which I knew that could be normal,
Mm-hmm.
because of
Mm-hmm.
labor or the epidural, but it was so strong. Like my teeth were clacking, and they couldn't get a blood pressure on me because my arm was shaking so
Oh,
bad. And so I tried to I was trying to just calm myself down and focus on my breath. But I just had this thought in my head that just kept coming, like, in a few minutes, you're not going to be able to breathe. Like this medicine is getting too high. It's affecting your chest. It's not just affecting your abdomen and your legs.
yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I was starting to freak out. And so Amy went and got the midwife and came back in, and they called the anesthesiologist, who told them to shut the epidural off.
Mm-hmm.
And so she did that. And I remember just holding Amy's hand and saying, please don't let me die in front of my husband. Like, he has had too much already. Amy, please don't let me die. And I remember the look on her face. She just had this blank stare on her face. And I knew exactly what was going on in her mind, because I've been in that situation before where it's an emergency and you're thinking in your head, stay calm, don't let her see that you're scared, but think about, what is the next thing I need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I could just register that that's what was going on in
Yeah.
her
Yeah.
brain. And she wasn't saying anything. So then I tried to say something. I said, okay, so it's Amy and Maud in the room with me. I'm like, here's what we're going to do. We are going to intubate me, and we're going to shut the Pitocin off, and we're going to do a C-section, and we're going to take baby out, and I will live. So who on the hospital unit right now can intubate me? And I'm just like, I'm trying to figure out, like, how can we just keep me alive, because I can't breathe.
Oh my gosh, Erin, it just sounded like you made this entire ridiculous plan. Like, oh my gosh, this is
So
like
ridiculous.
insane.
Yeah. And so looking back, I don't think I really would have stopped breathing, because from the time they shut the epidural off, it's, it starts to leave your system.
Right.
So I think I was at the peak of how bad it was going to feel, but it was still very much like, that was the big fear in my head, was I'm not going to be able to breathe in a few minutes. So I said to Maud again, like, who here can intubate me? Is there an ER doctor here? Is there an OB doctor here? Like, and she's like, we can go call the OB in. Yep. So she left to call in, and Amy called a rapid response. And so that brought in our nursing coordinator and
Mm-hmm.
ICU nurse. Mm-hmm. And they checked my oxygen levels, which were fine. And so they stayed in the room, and they were monitoring all sorts of stuff. And at some point, the anesthesiologist showed back up and was asking me all these questions. And I'm like, I don't know. I can't tell. I just know that I can't lift my shoulders off the bed. My mouth feels numb, and I feel like I can't breathe. So there's like all these people in the room, but the medicine had started wearing off, thankfully.
Yeah, that's
and
good.
then Maud checks me in the middle of all of this. Maud's like, let's check your cervix. And I'm fully dilated. And she's like, the head is like right there, Erin, like you're about to have the baby. And I'm like, holy crap. So I think it was a span of maybe half an hour, enough for the epidural to wear off enough that I was like, okay, I can breathe.
Okay.
I can breathe. I can move my arms. I feel okay.
Okay.
And so all the extra people left. They felt fine that I was okay. And so it was just back to me and Paul and Amy and Maud. And it was time to push the baby out. And it all of a sudden became super peaceful. Really weird.
After all of that hullabaloo, yeah.
Yeah, it was like 0 to 100 and then 100 to 0. I was like, what is happening? But so anyways, it was time to push. And the photographer was there, except I always forget that. yeah, so I started pushing, and it was just like in that moment, I remember having a thought like maybe they were wrong. Like maybe the baby's going to come out and be alive. It was just like my last tiny little bit of hope showing up. But I knew it wasn't true, but I just remember having that thought, and the pushing part was just so beautiful. It was just this unbelievable, surreal moment. I felt so connected to him in that moment. I feel like I really felt like his mom in that moment. It was really special to me. And I just remember in my head, I was saying all the things to myself that I've said to so many women before, like pushing their babies out, like curl around your baby and push into your bottom and don't be afraid of pooping and like
All of the
all this
things,
stuff,
all of the
all of
things.
the things. I talked myself through it, and I couldn't totally feel my bottom because the epidural wasn't fully worn off, but I could hear when I was pushing, and Amy and Maud would say, yeah, that's the spot. And they could see him moving. And so I would try to keep it right there.
Uh-huh.
And so just after maybe 2 pushes, she's like, yeah, the head's coming out. Do you want to feel it? And I was like, of course I do. So I reached down and I touched the top of his head, and I just felt so much love for him. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe how much love welled up in me just touching the top of this little head. And I wanted to help him through it. Like I knew it was a hard thing for both of us, and time just slowed down, and I felt totally in control, and I felt strong, and I could feel Paul standing next to me and Amy and Maud giving me their support, and Paul would kiss me in between pushes and rub my face, and so his head was coming out more, and I could kind of feel around his head with my fingers, and I could feel his head moving forward as I pushed. So I felt just really connected to him, and I was talking to him. I was like, okay, little baby, we're doing this together. It's gonna be okay. I'm here with you. And I didn't want it to be over. I didn't want him to be out because I knew then it would be really real, And so I stopped pushing for a minute. I tried to just like savor it. And I remember saying to him, okay, baby, we're just gonna wait here a minute so mama's skin can stretch a little bit so I don't tear, okay? And I looked at Paul and I told him, okay, the baby's gonna come out. Are you okay? Like he might look a little bit different, but it'll be okay. And later Paul told me this really funny story of what he was thinking during that whole point, and I really hope he tells Lee that story because it was hilarious.
Okay.
I'm gonna you should tell Lee if he asks any question during the interview.
Okay, I will.
Oh goodness. So anyways, I gave another big push and his head was out, and I saw all his hair, and I reached down with my other hand, and Maud just kind of like put my hands on his body, and I pulled him right out, laid him on my belly, and he was born. He was on me, and I couldn't believe it. And I remember I couldn't really see his face. His cord was really short, so he was just like low on my belly, and I had my hand on his head, and I felt like I just soaked him in, and I just loved him so much. And of course we didn't know the gender, and so Paul looked at me and so gently he said, it's a boy. And I cried because I knew it had been a boy, and everybody had been telling us it was a girl, but I knew it was a boy. And I said, it's Henry. Henry. And we hadn't picked a name. So I said, I'm sorry, Paul, that just came out from my heart. And he was like, it's okay, he can be Henry.
That's so sweet.
Our little Henry. And we just cried, and I just couldn't believe. I mean, I felt like I loved him so much. I felt like I should have been able to just love him back to life, is what it felt like, that feeling. And I keep that feeling with me all the time. And I have a picture by my bed that the photographer took of that moment, right when he came out, and he's on my belly and my hand is on his head and my eyes are closed. And I just remember that feeling of just soaking him in, like, this is my son. And I told Paul, you can touch him. He looked pretty nervous, so he just like touched his little fingers. And yeah. So Paul cut the cord and they put Henry higher up on my chest, and I got to see his little nose and rubbed his face. And yeah, it was really, really beautiful moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, it was a little crazy. I've never been in a situation taking care of a patient where that happened with their epidural.
Right.
So I was just like, I just kept being like, why are all these things happening to me? That
You're like, this should not be happening.
this is not the way it's supposed to
No,
go.
no.
And he had so much hair, which was a surprise to me. I wasn't expecting that because I was totally bald as a baby. And he had dark hair like Paul's, maybe like a little bit of red in it.
Oh,
And his hands and feet were so big.
Really?
Yes, and just every piece of him was so beautiful. I was just listening to your birth story, and I remembered feeling the same way as you. Just like, he's so perfect. He's so beautiful and so perfect.
They're just so perfect, aren't they? It's just
so perfect.
It's like the best feeling, just seeing them, and just it's wonderful.
Yeah, it was really just unbelievable. I'm like, we made him.
Yeah,
we made him. So yeah, that's how he was born. And I was really grateful for, the way the nurses and the midwife, how they handled him. They took him eventually and cleaned him up and weighed him. And they were just so gentle and kind with him and talked to him and just treated him like any other baby that had just been born. And I really liked that. And she eventually came, and Paul was sitting next to me in the bed, and she gave him to Paul. And that was just this moment that I'd been dreaming of for so long, like handing Paul our baby. And for so many dads, like, that's the moment when their relationship really starts to form with the baby.
Yeah.
And that's when they say hello. And I just remember being so sad, like, he's saying hello and goodbye at the same time. And I was just, yeah, it was a really sad moment, but really special too.
Yeah, it is just awful seeing that. I mean, you're just like, oh, this is why does it have to be this way?
Yeah.
Yep. So did you guys spend some time together, just the three of you?
Yeah. In hearing a lot of people's stories on your podcast, I a little bit regret that we didn't have family come. I don't know, just in that moment, I just wanted it to be me and Paul and Henry.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt like we already had some family there because of all my work family.
Of course. Yeah, of course.
But yeah, looking back, I do wish we had let some of our close family members come and hold him. But we didn't in that moment. But yeah, we spent a lot of time just holding him and talking to him and singing to him, and took a lot of pictures. Oh, the pictures that woman took are so amazing, and they're such a treasure to me. And I remember it was right about shift change that the new nurse came on, and she was a nurse we had just recently hired. And I knew her before. We had actually worked at another hospital together briefly before, but she is I don't know exactly what her title is. I want to say like bereavement nurse. Like, she is trained to work with families during a loss.
Yeah.
Kate, and she was just phenomenal. I couldn't believe that we had just hired her and she was working that day. And she came in, and our shift changes at 3 a.m., which is ridiculous to me.
Yeah, that's a little weird, but okay, whatever.
So she came in, so it's 3 a.m. So Henry was born at 12:30 in the morning. And so she comes in, and we're all cleaned up and everything by that point. And she says, okay, so, there's a lot of stuff to talk about and to decide, but I think right now you and Paul and Henry just need to have a little bit of sleep time. And I just remember being so grateful for her to say that. She's like, we're going to tuck you all in, and you're just going to sleep for a few hours, and then we'll talk about stuff later. And I was like, okay, thank you.
Yeah. Because you guys had been up basically since 2 days ago?
Yeah. Yep. So we'd been up since Monday morning, and it was Wednesday after midnight. I mean, we'd taken like an hour nap here or there, but
that's not enough.
No real sleep. I was exhausted, and Paul just like instantly fell asleep. And they had him we had just received a cuddle cot for our hospital. And so we had that next to my bed, and I had my hand on him. And yeah, I fell asleep with my hand on him right there. And so we slept for a few hours and she came back and, she had that giant packet that everybody gets with
Yep. All of the
all the
things.
paperwork. And she was just so great. She went through each of the things like individually with us. She was like, okay, so now the decision we're going to make is if you want to bury him or have him cremated. And she said, some people choose this because, and some people choose this because. And then she'd let us kind of talk about it. And she went through each decision like that. And then after every like 15 or 20 minutes, she'd say, do you want to take a break? Like, do you want me to come back later? And it was just amazing
That
because I
is
can't. Oh,
that is huge because I felt like, here's the packet, go through it.
yeah.
What? What am I supposed to? What am I doing? I just found out my baby died yesterday. I mean, come on.
I
It's like
know.
it's the most awful thing. Like, oh, so that's so wonderful. That's a
Yeah.
blessing. What a
And I mean,
huge
people
blessing.
our age usually haven't had to make any decisions
No,
like that.
not at all.
Like we don't know how to plan a funeral. We don't
No,
know what to, you know.
I need to order flowers. What? I mean, there's a
Yes.
casket. It's baffling. It's just, yeah,
Yeah.
that's
I just
so
remember being like, oh
wonderful.
my God,
What a
she was
blessing.
so amazing. I was so grateful for her. And so she walked us through the whole thing, all the decisions that we had to make and helped us make them. And like, I think we did it in 3 sections because I would start to get like tired and overwhelmed and just be like, okay, I just want to hold Henry and not be talking about this. So she'd come back in another 2 hours or something. And so that was really great. And I remember also one thing that I loved that she asked us was, is there anything you were really looking forward to doing with your baby when he was born? And I was like, oh, yeah, I was really excited about giving him a bath. Like I've given so many babies their first bath, and I was really excited to do that for my baby. And she said, okay, so let's do that. And I was like, oh, she was so great. And so, yeah, so we got to give him a bath, and I washed his hair and combed it and was talking to him and giving him kisses all over his cute little body. And Paul put his diaper on him. And we dressed him in an outfit that we had brought and a little swaddle blanket and a hat. And his little mouth, I think this is really common for stillbirths, but his mouth would hang open,
Mm-hmm.
because there wasn't any muscle tone.
Yeah.
And that made me so sad. So I put a little pacifier in his mouth.
Oh, that's a good idea.
He just
That's a
looked
great
like
idea.
a sleeping little baby.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so we did that. We cut a lock of his hair, and they did footprints and handprints, and then they actually they shrunk down his footprints and handprints really small and put it in a heart-shaped locket and gave it to me when we left.
Oh,
And
wow.
that was really, really sweet. I wear that every single day.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and so I think the hardest part was like deciding when to leave. They were very like you can stay as long as you want. Like there wasn't a 24-hour time limit.
Okay. So just
Um,
whatever the policy was just kind of open-ended then, huh?
yeah, which was really great, but like their body starts to break down, and it reached a point where every time we picked him up, I felt like we were causing damage.
Yeah.
Like his skin was
Yeah.
breaking down, and that hurt my heart. And so eventually I was just like, I don't think we should pick him up anymore. I don't want to hurt him. And so Kate kind of talked us through deciding like when's the right time to leave. There's never a right time to leave, but and then she said, okay, so now what you need to do is try to imagine what scenario would be the most comfortable for you in leaving. Do you want us to take Henry out of the room to the nursery and then you can leave? Do you want Henry to stay in this room while you and Paul leave the unit? Do you want him to be in his crib? Do you want one of us to be holding him? Like, can you envision a scenario that would make you feel like you could leave? And that was just so nice of her to do, because I was like, how can you leave?
Yeah.
How can you leave? But so I thought about it, and I said, I don't want someone to take him out of the room while I stay in here. That's going to make me feel yucky. Kind of like what Lee said with you guys, like I'd rather give him to someone than
Yeah.
have someone take him.
Yeah.
And so I went out of the room at one point because I wanted Paul to be able to have a little alone time with him before we left. So I went out of the room and I saw who was there for night nurses who were coming on. And I saw my friend Beth, and I just love Beth so much. And so I asked her, would it be okay if I left Henry with you when we leave, just so that I could feel like I'm leaving him with a friend who's going to take care of him?
Yeah.
And she started crying, and she was like, of course. So that's what I decided. And just before we left, I don't know if you wanted to talk about it in this episode or the next one, but about like what they found out about why he died.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask if they found anything conclusive, if you ended up doing an autopsy or anything
Yeah.
partial or full autopsy. So yeah, if you'd like to get into that, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah. I couldn't sit with the idea of an autopsy for some reason. That just bothered me. I know that some people choose to do that, and I think that's fine. But I just couldn't. And so we did do genetic testing because they said they could do that by just using a piece of the placenta instead of taking something from him. You know, they run a lot of blood tests while you're there looking for causes of death, for infection, or a bunch of different things. So just before we left, my midwife came in and she said that they had gotten a positive result back on one of the tests, which is pretty rare. You know, I mean, I think it's almost over half the cases of stillbirth, you never find out what happened.
Yeah.
So it's a test called the Kleinhauer-Betke test, or they call it the KB test. And what it looks for is signs of fetal red blood cells in the mom's bloodstream. And so that test had come back positive, and they said you have almost the entire blood volume of a fetus is in your bloodstream. So something happened that made Henry bleed into me.
Really?
It's called a fetal-maternal hemorrhage. Yeah.
Oh.
So it's incredibly rare. The only time I've ever seen it is when a woman was in a car accident. And so like you have some kind of trauma to the placenta or something like that. And so the blood flow doesn't work correctly. So I had no trauma, and I had no symptoms, and I wasn't bleeding, and I wasn't in pain. And it was just this freak thing.
Wow.
They don't really know why. Afterwards, after like all the doctors and pediatricians kind of met together and tried to come up with a conclusive decision, like what happened to Henry, their best guess was that I had a sort of like a partial placental abruption, where the placenta kind of started tearing away from the uterus, not enough to cause me symptoms, but so that when his blood circulated through the placenta, it would just kind of pool in this pocket instead of circulating back into him. And then my body just reabsorbed it. That's their best guess. There's not really a lot of evidence to that, but that's the only thing they could think of that would cause that.
Yeah.
So I was grateful for that. I mean, that day while we were right there in the hospital, we had a possible answer of what happened to him. That's pretty rare.
I know. I was like, that is rare.
Yeah. So we found that out. And so we ended up leaving. We left, I think around 8:30 or 9. So I think we stayed with him for about 20 hours before we left. And I had Beth come into the room, and I was holding Henry and talking to him, and just said, okay, I'm going to leave you with Beth. Daddy and I love you very, very much. And you're always going to be with us. And you're just going to stay asleep for a little bit. And Beth's going to watch over you. And laid him in the bassinet and walked out, holding my husband's hand as tight as I could and focusing on taking slow, deep breaths. And that is the hardest walk you will ever make in your life. Walking out of the hospital without your baby. And I made it to the car. That was my goal, just make it to the car. And then I fell apart. Driving away from the hospital is pretty awful, but we did it. So yeah, that's how it went.
And you guys, so you headed home. I think that it's one of the worst feelings, going to an empty home without your baby. It's just awful. Were you guys, did you plan to have Henry buried or cremated?
We eventually decided that we would have him cremated. basically two reasons is that Paul and I had kind of decided we would do that if one of us died. And also we don't own a home right now. So we didn't know where we were going to end up. And I didn't want to have him buried in a cemetery. And then 2 years from now we move.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, we had him cremated.
Okay.
And when Abel died, we had a small little service for him in our home with a few close friends. And that was so comforting for all of us. And so I knew right away that I wanted to have some kind of service for Henry too. So yeah, we planned that.
Who came to that one?
The funeral service?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny because again, you've never planned that. You don't really know what you're doing.
Yeah.
But we do have a very strong church community. We're Jehovah's Witnesses, and we have a very strong community. And so we asked someone in our congregation to give the talk, our friend Eric, and which you kind of feel bad asking someone to do that, but he did agree. And he did such a great job. And we have a recording of it. And I listen to it sometimes when it's hard days, and it helps me. And another friend offered to do all the flowers. And another friend said she would take some pictures. And we had printed out pictures of Henry and a few of my maternity pictures and put those on a couple of boards that we displayed. And Paul and I designed a little pamphlet that talked about him and had a poem in it and had some scriptures from the Bible that we found comforting. And I remember we didn't know how many to print. We asked our friend Eric, how many should we print? And he was like, well, I'd say at least 150. And I was like, what? We don't need 150? That's a huge number. And I just didn't expect very many people to come. It's a baby that they've never even met,
Yeah.
It was really... I didn't send out any formal invitations. I posted on Facebook, Henry's funeral service is going to be Saturday the 24th, but I didn't really expect a lot of people to come, honestly. And as it was getting closer, Paul said to me, I think we should be prepared that there might be a lot of people there. I was like, okay. So it turns out, I think the count they told us, so there were 280 people in the building, and there were 50 people tied in over the phone.
Oh, wow.
I just couldn't. It blew my mind that many people, there were friends from every town we'd ever lived in. There were friends there from old jobs. Just all these people showed up to be with us, and I couldn't believe it. The service itself was only 30 minutes, and we were there for hours just hugging everybody, and everyone was just crying with us, and it just was really such a good experience. It was so beautiful and encouraging to feel people grieving with us. And
support.
It was so hot. Yeah, so much support. It was so hot. It was August. My hormones were still all over the place, and there's all these people in this building, and I'm crying, right? So it's just all worked up. And one of my friends, Greg, he was so sweet. He would come up to me and he'd hand me tissues, and I would blow my nose and wipe my forehead, and then he'd take the tissues back, and then he'd give me a bottle of water, and I'd take a sip, and then he'd just disappear. And then 15 minutes later, he'd show back up, and he'd take the tissues, and he'd give me new tissues, and he'd give me water. It was amazing. I had never asked him to do that. He just kept showing up right when I was thinking oh my goodness, I really need to wipe my forehead or blow my nose, and he would show up. And he did that for 3.5 hours. He just kept coming back.
What a good friend.
Then by the time I know, it's so amazing. By the time we had hugged the last person, I looked around and realized that our friends had cleaned up everything, and they'd loaded all the gifts and cards and flowers into our car. And I just sat in the car, and they put another vase of flowers in my lap and told me they loved me, and shut the door, and we drove away. And it was just we just felt so taken care of. It was unbelievable.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really special. I remember we sang 2 songs while we were there, and I remember feeling like there was a sea of grief that I could just sink into and drown so easily. And then there's all these people, and they linked arms and formed this big raft, and they were just like holding me and Paul up. That's how I felt, like they were just holding me up and until we were strong enough to swim on our own again. And it was just a really great feeling that I want to hold on to forever.
That is beautiful. That is so beautiful.
Yeah, it was really special.
Oh, that is such a wonderful story. I think that is, you are really loved. You and Paul are so loved.
We feel very loved. Yep, we
Yeah.
feel very grateful.
Erin, thank you so much for sharing that story. Is there anything else you want to tell us about your little Henry or about the experience that you had with him?
Henry, he taught us so much. He was just a joy of a human, and I want people to know that he existed, and he he lived in my body for 38 weeks and now he lives in my heart for forever. And I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to talk about him and to honor him in this way. So thank you for that.
You're welcome, and thank you for coming on and sharing Henry with us.
Yeah, thanks.
Many thanks to Erin for being vulnerable and sharing her story of her sweet Henry with us. Head on over to our website, stillapartofus.com, and you can find our show notes there about this interview and any other resources that were mentioned. You can also sign up for our newsletter there. You can also learn how you can become a patron and support the work it takes to produce a show for just a few dollars a month. And lastly, where you can find out how to get in touch with us if you want to share your child's story on the show. The show was produced and edited by Winter and Lee Red. Thanks to Josh Woodward for letting us use his song Flickering Flame. You can find him at joshwoodward.com. Lastly, subscribe to this podcast and share it with a friend that might need it and tell them to subscribe. Why? Because people need to know that even though our babies are no longer with us, they're still a part of us.
It's very easy to be different, but very difficult to be better. Jonathan Ive.